Do you feel it? That crushing weight in your chest that appears without warning, making you wonder if you're having a heart attack when you're just sitting at your desk. The racing thoughts that spiral into catastrophic scenarios about things that haven't even happened yet. You tell yourself to calm down, to think positive, to just breathe, but the anxiety remains like a predator stalking you through every moment of your day. What if I told you that everything you've been taught about anxiety is wrong? Carl Jung, the revolutionary psychologist who mapped the deepest territories of the human mind, discovered something that will change how you see your suffering forever. Your anxiety isn't a malfunction to be fixed. It's a message from the most profound part of your psyche, desperately trying to wake you up to a truth you've been avoiding your entire life. While modern psychology treats anxiety as a disorder to medicate away, Jung understood it as the soul's emergency signal, screaming that you've abandoned who you really are in favor of who you think you should be. This isn't another video promising quick fixes or shallow coping mechanisms. This is about facing the brutal truth that your anxiety is trying to show you, and that truth might be the key to your liberation. Jung's approach to anxiety was radically different from anything that came before or after him. While others saw anxiety as pathology, Jung saw it as psychology. While others wanted to eliminate the symptoms, Jung wanted to understand the symbols. He discovered that anxiety emerges when there's a fundamental split in the psyche between who you authentically are and who you've learned to pretend to be for survival. Jung called this the neurotic paradox. The very strategies we use to feel safe actually create more of what we fear. Your people-pleasing creates rejection. Your perfectionism creates failure. Your need for control creates chaos. But Jung went deeper than surface behaviors. He understood that anxiety is the psyche's way of announcing that the persona, your social mask, has become so disconnected from your authentic self that your entire psychological system is breaking down under the strain. It's like trying to run a Mac operating system on a PC. The fundamental incompatibility creates constant errors, crashes, and system failures. Jung believed that modern anxiety epidemics weren't signs of individual weakness, but symptoms of collective disconnection from soul, from meaning, from the deeper archetypal patterns that give life structure and purpose. Your anxiety isn't happening to you, it's happening for you, as a wake-up call from parts of yourself that refuse to stay buried any longer. Meet Maria, a 28-year-old marketing coordinator whose anxiety began the moment she started caring more about appearing successful than being authentic. Maria's mornings begin with a familiar ritual, the 4 a.m. wake-up call from her nervous system, heart pounding for no apparent reason, mind already racing through everything that could go wrong in the day ahead. She's mastered the art of high-functioning anxiety, maintaining perfect performance at work, while secretly Googling, "Am I having a heart attack in bathroom stalls?" Maria's anxiety doesn't make logical sense. Her job is stable, her relationships are decent, her health is fine, yet she lives in constant anticipation of disaster. She's tried everything: meditation apps, therapy, yoga, journaling, positive thinking, but nothing addresses the core issue that Maria has spent so many years being who she thought she should be, that she's completely lost touch with who she actually is. Her anxiety began when she chose her career path based on family expectations rather than personal passion, when she entered relationships that looked good on paper but felt empty in reality, when she moved to a city because it seemed like what successful people do rather than where her soul wanted to be. Every choice made from external pressure rather than internal truth has contributed to the growing chasm between her authentic self and her performed self. And her anxiety is the sound of that chasm widening, the psychological equivalent of a building foundation cracking under pressure it was never designed to bear. Jung's most profound insight about anxiety was its connection to what he called the shadow, the repository of everything we've deemed unacceptable about ourselves and tried to repress or deny. Maria's anxiety intensifies whenever she gets close to acknowledging parts of herself. She's spent years hiding her anger at being controlled by others' expectations, her deep resentment about sacrificing her artistic dreams for financial security, her terror that she might actually be selfish, lazy, or inadequate underneath her perfect performance. The shadow doesn't disappear when ignored, it goes underground and manifests as psychological symptoms. Maria's people-pleasing masks her rage. Her perfectionism hides her fear of being ordinary. Her constant busyness covers her dread of stillness, where uncomfortable truths might surface. Jung understood that anxiety often emerges when the shadow starts demanding recognition, when the repressed parts of the personality begin knocking louder and louder on the door of consciousness. Maria's panic attacks often occur right after moments when she almost expressed her authentic feelings: a flash of irritation at a demanding boss, a surge of longing for her abandoned art practice, a moment of questioning whether her relationship is actually fulfilling. The anxiety serves as an internal alarm system, warning her that she's getting dangerously close to being real, to showing parts of herself that might not be approved of or accepted. But Jung discovered that the shadow isn't the enemy it appears to be. It's actually the key to psychological wholeness. The parts of yourself you most fear and reject often contain your greatest power, creativity, and authentic vitality. Jung understood that when psychological content can't find expression through consciousness, it manifests through the body. Maria's anxiety lives in her tissues, the chronically tight shoulders that hold unexpressed anger, the shallow breathing that reflects her fear of taking up space, the digestive issues that mirror her inability to process difficult emotions, the insomnia that results from a mind that can never rest because it's constantly monitoring for threats to her carefully constructed image. Her body has become the battlefield between her authentic impulses and her social conditioning. Every time she wants to say no but says yes instead, every time she feels angry but forces a smile, every time she craves solitude but forces herself to socialize, her nervous system registers the betrayal of her true nature. Jung saw the body as the unconscious made manifest, and Maria's physical symptoms are her psyche's way of expressing what her conscious mind won't allow. Her heart palpitations aren't just anxiety, they're her heart literally racing toward the life she's not living. Her muscle tension isn't just stress, it's her body preparing for action she never takes. Her digestive problems aren't just nerves, they're her system rejecting the experiences she's force-feeding herself for the sake of appearances. Jung believed that true healing required listening to these somatic messages rather than simply medicating them away. Maria's body is trying to tell her something crucial. She's living a life that her deepest self finds intolerable, and no amount of surface-level coping strategies will address the fundamental misalignment between who she is and how she's living. Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, rather than who others expect you to be, offers a completely different approach to understanding anxiety. For Maria, her constant panic isn't a sign that something's wrong with her, it's a sign that something's right with her, that some part of her psyche is refusing to accept the compromise she's made with authenticity. Jung saw anxiety as often being the call to individuation, the psyche's way of saying it's time to stop living according to external scripts and start honoring your inner truth. Maria's breakthrough came during what she thought was her worst panic attack yet. Instead of fighting the sensation or trying to make it go away, she did something radical. She listened to it. In the middle of the physical chaos, she heard something underneath the fear, a voice that had been trying to get her attention for years. It was telling her that she was dying spiritually, that every day of living inauthentically was killing something essential within her. The panic wasn't random, it was purposeful. It was her soul's emergency response to a life that had become a betrayal of everything she truly valued. Jung called this the sacred wound, the psychological crisis that forces you to confront the gap between your lived life and your unlived life. Maria realized that her anxiety wasn't trying to destroy her, it was trying to save her from a life of sleepwalking through someone else's dream of success. The physical symptoms that had terrorized her for years suddenly made sense. They were her psyche's way of creating enough discomfort that she couldn't continue ignoring the profound misalignment in her life. I want you to pause and consider something radical. What if your anxiety has been trying to tell you something important that you've been refusing to hear? Think about when your anxiety is strongest. Is it when you're about to do something that looks good but feels wrong? When you're in situations where you have to hide parts of yourself to be accepted? When you're making choices based on should rather than authentic desire? Jung believed that psychological symptoms are always meaningful, always pointing towards something that needs attention in your life. Your anxiety might be your psyche's way of saying you're living too far from your truth, that you've sacrificed too much of who you really are for the sake of who you think you should be. Here's a question that might change everything for you. If your anxiety could speak, what would it say? If you listened to it as a messenger rather than treating it as an enemy, what might it be trying to tell you about the gap between your authentic self and your lived life? Comment below with one area of your life where you suspect you might be living inauthentically, where you're performing a role rather than expressing your truth. Sometimes acknowledging these disconnections is the first step toward the kind of deep healing Jung was pointing toward. Jung's approach to healing anxiety involved what he called shadow integration, the process of consciously reclaiming and accepting the parts of yourself you've rejected or denied. For Maria, this meant facing some uncomfortable truths about herself that she'd spent years avoiding. She had to acknowledge her anger at being controlled by others' expectations, her grief over abandoned dreams, her fear that authenticity might mean losing people she cared about, and most terrifyingly, her suspicion that she might actually be selfish, demanding, or too much if she stopped performing agreeableness. Jung's shadow work wasn't about acting out every impulse, but about bringing unconscious content into conscious awareness where it could be integrated rather than projected or repressed. Maria began dialoguing with her anxiety rather than fighting it, asking what it needed her to know rather than how to make it stop. Through this process, she discovered that her anxiety contained valuable information about boundaries she needed to set, dreams she'd abandoned, and authentic desires she'd been afraid to acknowledge. The integration process was gradual and sometimes uncomfortable. Maria had to learn to tolerate being disliked when she set boundaries, to handle the guilt of prioritizing her needs, to sit with the fear that authenticity might mean loneliness. But Jung understood that this temporary discomfort was the price of psychological wholeness. As Maria began honoring her authentic impulses, instead of constantly overriding them, her anxiety began to transform from a constant emergency signal into occasional guidance about when she was drifting too far from her truth. As Maria began living more authentically, her relationship with anxiety fundamentally changed. Instead of constant background dread, she experienced what Jung called legitimate anxiety, appropriate responses to real situations that required attention or action. Her body began to relax as the war between her authentic impulses and her social conditioning ended. She made career changes that aligned with her values rather than just her resume, entered relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than social expectations, and most importantly, developed the capacity to tolerate being misunderstood or disapproved of when living authentically. Jung understood that individuation doesn't eliminate all psychological discomfort, but it eliminates the specific suffering that comes from self-betrayal. Maria still felt nervous before important presentations, but it was the natural nervousness of someone engaged in meaningful challenge rather than the existential dread of someone living a lie. She experienced sadness when relationships ended, but it was clean grief rather than the complicated anguish of wondering if she'd been authentic enough to deserve love. Her anxiety had transformed from enemy to ally, from constant crisis to occasional guidance. Jung called this process making the unconscious conscious, and for Maria, it meant no longer being controlled by psychological forces she didn't understand. She could feel anxiety arising and ask herself what authentic need or boundary it might be pointing toward, rather than immediately assuming something was wrong with her for feeling uncomfortable. Maria's journey reflects what Jung observed as a universal pattern in modern anxiety epidemics. We live in a culture that rewards performance over authenticity, appearance over substance, productivity over meaning. This creates what Jung called a collective neurosis, where entire populations are disconnected from their deeper nature and suffering from symptoms they don't understand. Jung noticed that anxiety often peaks during life transitions, when the gap between authentic self and social role becomes unsustainable. College students choosing careers based on prestige rather than passion, adults in midlife realizing they've been living someone else's dream, elderly people facing mortality with regrets about unlived lives. The common thread is always the same. Anxiety emerges when we're living too far from our truth. Jung's insight was that individual healing and collective healing are connected. When someone like Maria stops betraying herself for social approval, it gives others permission to examine their own authenticity. When people begin honoring their genuine nature rather than performing acceptable roles, it shifts the entire cultural conversation about what it means to live well. Jung believed that the cure for collective anxiety wasn't more medication or stress management techniques, but a return to what he called the transcendent function, the capacity to bridge conscious and unconscious, persona and shadow, individual needs and collective belonging without sacrificing essential authenticity. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or antisocial. It means becoming genuinely yourself in relationship with others who are also committed to authenticity rather than performance. Jung understood that individuation isn't a destination, but a lifelong process of continued alignment between inner truth and outer expression. Maria still encounters situations that trigger old anxiety patterns, especially when she's tempted to sacrifice authenticity for approval or when she's faced with choices between security and growth. The difference now is that she recognizes these moments as invitations to deepen her commitment to authentic living rather than signs that she's failing or broken. Maria developed what she calls her authenticity compass, a practice of regularly checking whether her choices are coming from genuine desire or societal conditioning, whether she's honoring her needs or abandoning herself for others' comfort, whether she's living from fear or from truth. Jung called this ongoing work holding the tension of the opposites, the ability to honor both individual authenticity and relational responsibility without sacrificing either. Maria learned that some anxiety will always be part of a fully lived life, the nervousness of growth, the discomfort of change, the vulnerability of being seen authentically, but this legitimate anxiety is qualitatively different from the existential dread of self-betrayal. It's the anxiety of someone engaged with life rather than hiding from it, of someone taking meaningful risks rather than playing it safe, of someone committed to truth rather than comfort. Jung believed that this ongoing integration work wasn't just personal therapy, but a contribution to the evolution of consciousness itself, both individual and collective. Here's what Jung understood that modern psychology often misses. Your anxiety isn't a disorder to be eliminated, it's information to be integrated. It's your psyche's way of telling you that something essential about your life needs to change, that you're living too far from your authentic nature, that parts of yourself are dying from neglect while you perform roles that were never truly you. The path forward isn't found in managing symptoms, but in listening to their message. Starting today, I challenge you to have a different relationship with your anxiety. Instead of asking, "How do I make this stop?" ask, "What is this trying to tell me?" Instead of fighting the discomfort, get curious about what authentic need or boundary it might be pointing toward. Instead of medicating the messenger, listen to the message. Jung's path of individuation isn't easy or quick, but it's the only approach that addresses anxiety at its root, rather than just managing it at the surface. It requires the courage to face parts of yourself you've avoided, to live more authentically even when others don't understand, to choose growth over comfort and truth over approval. In the comments below, complete this sentence. My anxiety might be trying to tell me that I'm not being authentic about Bathak. Don't try to fix or change anything yet, just listen to what arises when you ask the question differently. Subscribe if you're ready to explore more of Jung's profound insights into the psychology of authenticity and the courage required to become who you really are. Because the world doesn't need more people managing their symptoms, it needs more people courageous enough to live their truth.